Hey everyone, welcome to the Lake Michigan Angler Podcast. Today we are here with Captain Al Johnson of Rainmaker Sportfishing out of Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, so we thought about today's episode, and Rob was saying, how long you've been chartering, and we're going to cover kind of like the backstory and how you got started.
Yep.
But then we thought about it, and we're like, hey, you know what? Let's talk about Kenosha as a whole. And what it's like to fish out of that port and all of that. So that's the crux of today's episode for those of you that are interested in fishing out of Kenosha, maybe already fish out of Kenosha, just kind of highlighting what's unique about the port and how you fish it and all that stuff. And so before we get to that, can you talk a little bit about how you got started in salmon fishing here? Because you run a charter business, obviously.
Yes, I've been doing it. This is my 38th year, and I started when I was in high school, first mating for a guy. And when I got out of high school, I graduated high school in 1984, I decided that college or fishing or hunting, and I went the fishing route. So in 1985, on my 19th birthday, I got my captain's license, and I worked for a company called Captain Jim's for a long time. And then I bought a gentleman out of his business, and I think 2001, and been rolling ever since.
Wow, that's 38 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. That means I'm old.
It means you have a lot of experience, and you've seen this lake transform over that entire, period. What period in your mind sticks out to you the most over this?
The best fishing that the king fishing, the coho fishing seems to. We've had some years that haven't been as good as other years. 99, 2000 were a little weaker, but. As far as the kings, I would say, the mid-2000s, it seemed like we really had a good run at them. It'd be nothing to go out in August and catch your limit of fish in a couple, 3 hours on the hill. And I think that stretch from, probably 04 to, maybe 2010 was, I thought, the best. The shore fishing hasn't been as good for kings, but it's coming back. So, but I would say that stretch. Coho fishing, I thought, and like last year, I thought out of Kenosha we had a pretty good year.
Yeah.
We had a good late run on them, and I think that's something we should touch base on because I don't think a lot of the amateur guys know how to fish the cohos in the deep water and stuff like that. So, but I would say that was the best time period.
Was it? What was it about that? You said 04 to 2010. Was it just the sheer numbers and size, or
the numbers more than the size?
Okay.
The size. To me, it's coming back a little bit.
Yeah.
They're not stocking as many kings. The king stock has been up the last 3-4 years, but the overall numbers, it'd be nothing to go out at 5 a.m. and be set up in the dark, and when that first light hit, you would have 4 or 5 kings on. And a lot of them were 8 to 10 pounds, but then you would get the 15 to 20 pounders.
Yeah.
The size wasn't there. But the guys that knew how to fish the hill in the south and north end of the hill out of Kenosha, it'd be nothing to get you 20 to 30 fish in 3-4 hours. And that was common for, and if we weren't in the restaurant by 8 o'clock in the morning, it was frustrating. We were spoiled.
I was just about to say, very, very spoiled.
We were very spoiled, yes.
What for you over your career, if that was the good time, what was the rough patch? Was there some rough patches where you're like, man, this is really tough?
The mid-90s were tougher. I wouldn't say, we've always had a pretty good lake trout fishing out of Kenosha, and this is before the lake trout fishing got popular in Illinois. I mean, the reefs got good and people learned how to fish them, and we've fished the lake trout different. We've always had a pretty good run of lake trout, so that was, and it was always, back in the 80s and 90s, it was cohos, and then we'd go to lake trout, and then we would try to catch kings if they were around. And there wasn't a lot of guys that were very good at kings. There was only a handful of guys that really knew how to catch them on the hill and in the deep water. Keating is a good one. Arnie Arendando was good. And then we learned, and that's when we don't target lake trout as much as we used to. Mm-hmm. We do in the deep water, but not. I don't go out every day thinking I got to catch my limit of lake trout. I'm going out there right out of the gate. I'll fish the hills sometimes in August, and then I'll slide out to deep water for lake trout, and nothing wrong with the lake trout. It's just that we got to fish them deeper. It's a little different fishing.
Yeah, changes it up, and
it's nice to have a mixed bag. So
yeah, I think that's the benefit for our area, right? We have we have options for the most
Yes.
part
Yes.
consistently, right? It's
Yep.
like a reoccurring theme here. In case you haven't caught this
Right.
on the podcast from our many episodes here. So obviously you're out of Kenosha. Have you always been out of Kenosha, or is it just where you've been for?
I was out of Kenosha until 2001 when I bought the business. I fished out of North Point a little bit, and kind of, I would say 90% of my time has been out of Kenosha. I do go to Sturgeon Bay now for a couple of weeks in July. The last couple of years, I got a customer of mine that brings me up there. I used to fish Washington Island in the late 80s, early 90s, Sturgeon Bay in the early 90s, but for just a month at a time. But then I would say 90% of my fishing's been out of Kenosha, Racine. I do hold an Illinois guide license, so I do come to Illinois when fishing's good down here. But I generally stay in Kenosha.
Got you. Were you up in Sturgeon Bay this past summer?
Yes.
Because they had a nice run of kings up there.
They had a very good run.
What's going on up there that, in your mind, that led to just so many big kings up there this year?
I think a lot of things. The bait fish population
was really good up there.
I think with the natural reproduction of the kings coming across the lake, I think the kings are chasing any kind of bait they can find. I'm very good friends with Arnie, and we talk all the time. He's on the WLBA, and we talk all the time about the bait fish population and what do you think? What are we seeing? And we're out every day. Sometimes twice a day. So I didn't think the bait. I would say probably 3-4 years ago, if you'd asked me, I'd say no, the bait fish population's not coming back. But now I believe it is, and I think that's the reason that fishing got better up there again. The kings aren't going to go or anything. They got to have food.
Right.
It's like us. What do we do in the morning? We're finding food.
Yeah.
They're looking for food, and if it's on the other side of the lake or down here or up there, they're going to go for it. And there was a pretty good bait population up there last year. We'd go out in the morning and we'd find bait on that. They call it the bank. The problem with the bank reef is we fished the tournaments up there. There were just so many boats. So I ended up fishing north of the bank reef, more up to Bailey's Harbor, because that's where more of the bigger fish were being caught. And I think that's because there was too much pressure. The one morning I went out, I couldn't get a spot on the bank. And I told my guys, I said, we just got to get out of here.
Is the bank, if I recall, I know we talked about this in some of the prior podcasts, and some of the other captains and guests mentioned it. Is that where it's like just this crazy drop off and people just line up and run down the line?
Yep.
Wow,
yep.
It's
insane. I got out there at 4 a.m. and I'm looking at the lights and I'm like, oh my gosh,
Is this like a legit boat conga line?
Oh, it's unbelievable. And they always talk about Ludington. Ludington was the #1 port on Lake Michigan for a long time for kings. And when you'd go out and some of their tournaments and stuff, they'd have 400 or 500 boats. And that's no lie. I fished out of Manistee and it was crazy. But the Mank Reef last year was like that at times. And I truly believe, I got a friend of mine, his name is RJ. He's on a small boat and they fished the Salmonorama, the whole time, all day long. And they would get on the outside of the boats, and we started talking. I said, I believe you're right. The bigger fish are going to be on the outside or north. So we started going north, and we didn't catch as many fish. And I think that's where people get caught up in the numbers. Okay, but if you're fishing a tournament like Salmonorama, why do you care about the numbers?
Right.
You're targeting one thing, big fish. And I think that's where people, like that KD tournament up there's a nice tournament. I think that's where people, they don't understand. Yeah, you can catch your 20 kings in the first hour and a half if it's good. But are you catching big ones?
Right.
Why are you there? Don't lose track of why you're there. And that's my theory in tournaments. That's why we do well in tournaments, because we want numbers, but we want big fish.
Right.
Because I don't like taking second, but when I do, I'm happy. Don't get me wrong. but I want to win. That's why I'm there. I don't go there to take second or third.
Yeah.
And we fish tournaments hard. In all the tournaments around here, we've done well, and because of that reason. We go into it with a little different mindset,
Yeah.
I'm not nothing wrong with second or third, because it's usually in the pro division, it's pretty good money, but first is always better, and that's my and I got a good crew, Caleb Zorn and Dion Perry, they're awesome, and that's, and if we take a charter, that's our mindset, and that's why we fish it hard, and that's what we did last year in Bailey's Harbor. We started catching bigger fish, and unfortunately we couldn't catch, the biggest one, obviously, but we did good,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. When you mentioned that you're up there, I just remember like Salmonorama last year. Everybody on the leaderboard at first was all Sturgeon Bay for the most part.
And then Bailey's Harbor and Washington Island. Washington Island's been good, and that's kind of a hidden secret, because it's
not anymore.
No, but it's you have to go to the island but the fishing there. When I was there in the late '80s, I caught the tail end of the real good fishing. And the guy that I was working for at the time, we were on a 26-foot Mako, and we ran 4 downriggers, and we ran them, with J plugs. Mm-hmm. That's what we ran. Then later on, we'd change the spoons, but it was always Sutton spoons. That's all we ran. We didn't have any of the good stuff now. And then I got him into talking. I said, come on, let's run a couple of dipsies. I was trying to change him. He was old school. He was an older guy. We'd go out in the morning and have 6 kings on. 2 dipsies and 4 downriggers. Mm-hmm. It was that good. But I only had that for 1 year, and then every year it got little less.
Yeah.
And then we started going to Sturgeon Bay and fishing steelhead. We'd chase back then in the early 90s. You went off the fax machine. We didn't have all this weather stuff we have now to tell us the temperatures of the water and stuff like that. And we'd chase these breaks. We'd go 30, 40 miles. But when we got to steelhead, it was unbelievable. And it's like that. It was like that this year in Sturgeon Bay. I missed it. But they said in late June, out of Algoma and Sturgeon Bay, they got the steelhead real good again.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's pretty cool. It's always cool to find out. We don't normally hear a lot from further up, like way up north on our side of, like, you hear other side, you hear down here in the area, but to hear kind of like what's going on up there, it is almost like its own world.
Yeah,
it really is.
It is. Yep.
So we'll bring it back here to our area in Kenosha.
Yep.
So give us a lay of the land in terms of fishing out of Kenosha, and the structure, what it's like to fish out of here. Obviously, the hill stretch, and it passes through Kenosha, stretches through Kenosha. Yep. So walk us through kind of how you're fishing it, what's going on in the lay of the land and out in the waters here.
Well, I think that's why Kenosha's, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, probably the number 1 port on the west side of the lake, between Kenosha, Racine, and North Point catches the tail end of that. But, excuse me, I believe that, in June, for instance, in June, we'll go out and we fish a lot of times inside the hill north of the harbor. So say down in Illinois, Waukegan, North Point and stuff where the coho fishing slows down, we'll get this batch of cohos that stay up north. And I say north of the harbor. And what I mean by north is, you Carthage College to Racine, and we have a lot of structure there. We have a place we call the Honey Hole, and then that's just inside the hill. And so when you get outside, I'll use latitude and longitude, like the 4,500 line, and out a lot of times to the hill. We'll hold cohos for a couple of weeks. And we'll hold them, where we're fishing them down a little bit. And then later on in the summer, when we start fishing the hill, we don't, unless I know there's no fish there, every day I'll stop on the hill. And I'll fish it for a little bit. And then a lot of days I don't stay long. And the hill runs basically, I would say, about a mile over the line in Illinois. It runs all the way to north of Racine. And it runs out at a 30-degree angle. And there's certain spots on the hill that jog out. Mm-hmm. If you were to ask me south of Kenosha where my best spot on the hill is 3,300. And if the guys that fish don't know what I'm talking about. 3,250 to 3,350. There's some jogs in there where the hill goes out and comes back in. It just seems if there's kings around in that little stretch a lot of times. And in the north of Kenosha, 3,950. There's some spots on the hill in between Racine and Kenosha that just seem like that 3,950 to 40 back to 3,900. You get out there, a lot of times it jogs out there and it comes back in. And a lot of people don't realize that, but it'll hold kings there, And don't get me wrong, not every day. But sometimes if we're fishing a tournament, it's a go-to spot, And then when you get up farther towards Racine, you have 3 hills. And it starts around 4,200, 4,250, right in there. And then you start getting a series of hills. And them hills up there hold a lot of lake trout. And when we're fishing tournaments or, even with customers, if we need them, it's usually pretty good there. Now, it's not as good as it used to be. And then you get up to 4,600, 4,800, the hill starts to, peter out a little bit. It kind of fades a little bit and it gets more rocky. And that's about the end of the hill there. So it's probably 20 miles long.
Yeah. And then you gave some numbers there, but in terms of depth, right? Like what's that range that hill is sitting on for people?
It's certain spots of the hill are, drop faster than other spots, but like 50, 55 to 110 is usually 55
range.
to 100. Yeah, it drops pretty good. You can be going out and all of a sudden on your graph, you show the customers, in the dark, well, how do you know where you're going to start? And I said, watch the graph. We're gonna fish a hill, and you try to teach them a little bit, and then they can see the hill dropping off. And there's a couple little hills in Kenosha before you get to the main hill, and then it drops off. I typically in the morning like to start on top. 70, 80 feet of water we call on top. And then I'll, if we don't get bit in the first couple minutes, I'll start sliding out.
Right.
We're pretty aggressive in the morning because if they're going to bite, they're going to be right there.
Right. You want them cover
And if
water.
they're, in the first hour, if you've only had a couple bites, we get out of there, usually. And then we start trolling out. Later in the morning, if we are catching a few kings, it seems like that 120 to 140. It seems like they get in stages. And then all of a sudden, as the morning goes on, the kings will peter out a little bit, and then, you might get a few more out deeper. But for some reason, at 120 to 140, south or north of the harbor, it seems like a good area mid-morning, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
Right.
There's always a mid-morning bite on kings. You just have to be there. You have to know where they are. And we don't always know where they are, but, but that's typically in that stretch,
Yeah. Well, that's where it helps to have a network, right? Because you might be still fishing the top 80 feet, 90 feet, right on the edge, and your buddy's out at 120s, nailing them. Hey, they're over here. Come out.
And networking is huge. We were talking about it before we got started this morning. I mean, knowing the right information and getting the correct information. We fished quite a few tournaments and we've had pretty good success because we know who to talk to. And it's not. Rob here gives great information, but if somebody gives him false information, he doesn't know. And we just talked about this. We had a conversation about this, and I think that's one of the most important things. And when I do seminars and stuff, I try to teach the guys that are going out just on the weekend, make sure your information is correct. Yeah. Because just be careful.
Well, you're touching on it, right? But well, I think we could just shoot it straight, right? There is instances where people are putting out different information from what's actually working, right? Like, if we're going to just be honest about it. And
Fishermen are always honest.
always.
I don't know, Rob, because I remember when you told me this hot lure, and I'm out there dragging it, nothing happened, and then I come in and I see you with a little thin fish. I'm like, wait, what? But we're laughing about it. But no, it happens, right? There are instances where information is being put out there that is either super late, weeks past already before and they're trying to portray as if it's current, or that's just flat out misinformation about what was used and, to throw people off.
And it's funny in tournaments, me and Arnie used to fish together quite a bit over across the lake. And we always had this routine that, Arnie's a good talker, and I always said, Arnie, go do your job. Go get information. I'll clean the boat, or I'll, fix the lines. And we'd laugh, and he'd go talk to people. And even the charter guys over there, it's a big deal. Even around here, I was telling Rob before we got started, there was a guy up in Milwaukee. I was fishing a Milwaukee tournament. He came up to me, and we'd fished the pro division the first day. We were in 5th place, and I was talking to Caleb Zorn. And we were talking about fishing and what we were thinking. And guy walks up to me, and he says, I'm sure you won't tell me what, he shakes my hand. He said, I'm sure you won't tell me where you went. I told him everything. Because you still have to go there and catch them.
Yeah.
And the way the lake changes every day from hour to hour sometimes, you still have to go there the next day and catch them. Yep. And I told the guy, you can follow me, I don't care, just don't cut me off. And it's true. And you can, people are creatures of habit sometimes, and that's not good fishing, in my opinion. And Rob will tell you the same thing. You have to be able to change.
Yeah.
You can't go out there, I don't stay in a spot if I'm not catching fish in 15, 20 minutes or getting bit. I'm moving. I'm not pulling lines and moving. I'm trolling out or trolling north or south or doing something different. I get very frustrated for not catching fish, and,
Sure.
and I think a lot of the charter boat captains are like that, but there's a lot of them that are, they just get into a habit and, well, we went here and we did this, and you can't do that, and that's why information is so important, the correct information. You have to, know who you're talking to, and don't get on the blogs and stuff unless you know the guy talking. And Rob's shaking his head because he knows I'm right, and we talk all that. When I come down and get baits, me and Rob will talk, and I always ask him, what do I ask you? Oh, when did they get them? Yep. Was it 3 days ago or 4 days ago, or was it this morning? Mm-hmm. Because as big as the lake is, and as big as the area is out of Kenosha or wherever you're fishing, North Point, Waukegan, it's such a especially if you're only doing it once a week.
Right.
You don't want failure. That's why when I do my seminars, I try to get people. We and Rob are talking again about tournaments and what you do in tournaments, because I feel that's everyday fishing. Be aggressive when you're doing it, so you can maximize your time. That's basically it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Especially because like you said, you're going out one day out of a week.
Right.
There's there's a lot that's going on between those 6 days from when you come out. And and to a lesser extent, if we have a weather pattern that's holding it, you can probably get into something. But if it changes, then it whatever was reported the day before is out the window. You're probably going out there figuring it out fresh because it changes a lot. So, I mean, the best anyone can hope for is like the weather's holding fairly, similar day to day for over a couple of days, and you can kind of put something that might carry over day to day. But I mean, to your point, it's the old analogy, right? You can lead the horse to the well, right? And you can't make it drink, kind of an analogy thing. So you can tell, here's everything I used, but can you take that and put it to work?
Right, and I think again, I'm referring back to Rob. We talked for about a half hour before we got set up. A lot of it is the little things. Some guys will teach you currents, and some guys will teach you this and teach you that. To me, that's the least of my worries. When I get out there in the morning, my number one thing is where the wind direction is, how I'm going to put the boat. Okay, and that's pretty easy because the currents to me are easy to figure out. Okay, if I put a downrigger ball down, it's hanging straight down, and I'm going 2.5 miles an hour over the top, I'm too slow. I look at the way my downriggers pull. But then one of the things I do, and a lot of guys don't realize this, and I try to teach them, is the water clarity. And the water clarity changes more than you think. And if you're there in the morning on the hill the day before or the night before and the water's clear, you're going to use different stuff. Mm-hmm. In the morning, if the water's chalky, what are you going to do? And Dion and Caleb that have worked for me a long time, and they're both captains now. That's one of the things out there. A lot of times Caleb is very good. And I always tell Caleb in tournaments, I said, "What does the water look like?" When we're sitting there waiting to set up, before the time, and stuff like that. The currents to me, and now I've been doing it a long time, so it's a little easier. In the deep water, when the currents are bad, it's getting the boat straight, and watching the way your stuff's pulling. And what a lot of guys don't realize is your coppers are so important now. We catch a lot of fish in coppers. And I'm not a fan of lead cores outside of 50, 60 feet of water. I use all coppers. I think coppers are more true. I love lead cores are inside. But when steelhead are out deeper, don't get me wrong, I like lead cores. But the coppers, if your boards are dragging back and they're not up where they should be, you're too slow. And it's just little things like that. I tried, it's getting back to the lures and stuff. Rob can tell you what somebody tells him is good. Right. Just pay attention,
You mentioned a couple of things, which is certainly it's a theme that speakers will touch on. Rob's touched on some of our videos, which is observing how everything's being pulled. Yep. And I think that probably might be like one of the biggest, I don't want to say secrets, but one of the biggest things most newer guys are missing is how do your rods look? How does everything, the boards look? How does everything being pulled? Is one rod, say this rod's really bent over, this one isn't, and you're pulling off, your angle's off. And one thing you mentioned in that was that I haven't heard before, which it really stuck to me, was watching your rigger ball and the cabling to see how that's pulling. That's a really interesting. So can you walk through in terms of if you're dropping down, if the line is here versus here, what does that tell someone?
Well, like what I was saying before is so I'll put the downrigger ball. What I normally do in the morning, like when I'll go back to Dion. When me and Dion worked together in the morning, our routine was he would set up the port side, I would set up the starboard side. And the first thing I'd ask him, we always let a wire dipsy out first. And the reason is I think wire dipsies are, if you dial them in right, will catch more kings than anything else. And I think it's something to do with the wire. Not that it dives, it's something with the vibration of the wire. I really, truly believe that. So we get a wire dipsy out right away, and I'll always ask him, what do you think? And then we try to get a downrigger out right away. And when that downrigger ball is hanging straight down or just a little bit of an angle, to me, that's too slow. Okay. I troll faster than a lot of people only because I have diesel boats and my boats troll faster.
What's fast for you?
I like to be 2.7, 2.8, 2.9. Okay. I mean, I'm clipping.
And knots or miles an hour?
Miles an hour. And a lot of times I don't, everybody, you'll hear a lot of guys say, well, I was over 3 and that works. I truly believe it. King salmon swim at 30 miles an hour. Cohos, if you ever see a coho come up and strike something or a steelhead or something, watch how fast they are. Yeah. So you how many times, and I'd never put a video on my downriggers, but how many times you see people say there'll be 10, 12 fish that come up and look at a bait before one finally bites it. So what do you think they're doing off to the side? That's why I try to encourage people to have their stuff right, and we don't. So when that downrigger ball is straight up and down, it's too slow. When they get it out a little bit, I don't know, I wouldn't. It's hard to say the angle, but it's just.
If this was 90, it seems like it'd be like a 45.
Yeah, not quite 45. So like in between,
And that'll change depending on the boat.
Yeah.
The weight
exactly. Exactly.
Some guys using 20 pounders, some guys using.
Yeah, and the weight,
yeah.
the size of the weight. Bob's right, the size of the weight. I use 15-pound weights. The only time I increase the weight size is if I'm fishing lake trout out deeper or I want to get deeper with something, then I'll increase the weight size. But I used to use 12s, and then I just went to 15s. They seem to track better and, everything else. And
Good
but
sweet
yeah,
spot.
and I use the probe. My new boat I've had for 2 years, I haven't had a probe on it in 2 years. And I've fished just as good. The only time I like the probe is for temperature. Now, a lot of guys...
But that can be contributed just because of your years of knowledge. You have a feeling for these things. Like you mentioned, just by looking at your rigger ball, for someone that's new, that they might haven't learned that.
And the probes are all different. Okay. I use a fish hawk. I like a fish hawk. I know the depth raters are pretty good. But to me, I got really hardcore using them for a couple of years. And I thought I was struggling more than usual. And I think because, to me, the speed was not accurate down below. That's just me. And so I quit using it for the speed. I'd look at it for the temperature breaks. And, you hear guys swear by it. This RJ fished a tournament with this a couple years ago, and he was mad at me. He goes, we're going too fast for a lake trout. And, he fishes different, though,
Right.
And he's a very good fisherman, but he just fished lake trout different, and I like using spin doctors for lake trout. I like keeping the speed up because at the same time I'm fishing lake trout, when we're fishing a tournament, I'm trying to catch a king or a steelhead or something different, And it was funny. He was mad. We won the tournament. And we had a few beers after. I said, how'd that work out for you, RJ? And but we had fun, But it was interesting, A lot of people fish different.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit more aggressive with the speed, I think, than a lot of guys. I'll catch guys on the hill, And that's not always good. Don't get me wrong. But I feel if I'm fishing a 6-hour charter and you're going 2.5 miles an hour to 3 miles an hour, and the guy's going 2 miles an hour, who's covering more water?
Well, yeah, obviously you. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my theory on it.
Right.
And then when you get in the open water, when you're fishing outside 140, 150, and you got to get out there, I kick the speed up a little bit. Do I lose some lake trout bites? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I also feel that you can, August, when there's kings around, or steelhead, and last year we had phenomenal steelhead and coho fishing in August. We had good steelhead fishing in August, and then the cohos showed up in probably third, fourth week in August.
Yeah, they were donkeys.
And big ones, and it was good fishing, and a little different fishing, but something maybe we can touch base on a little bit. But that was really good fishing. We had a very, very good month of August last year. North Point, Kenosha, Racine, all of us did.
Yeah, it was this whole area. For
yeah,
us.
absolutely.
It was
North Point was as good as we were. I mean, there was no advantage to being in Kenosha in August last year. I mean, maybe early August we had the steelhead up north, but other than that, I mean, I think Waukegan was good. We had a nice 40-mile stretch here. Milwaukee was good at that time. Mm-hmm. And everybody struggles a little bit. I talk to guys out of Milwaukee quite a bit, and I got some good friends up there. And, it seemed like they had a really tough period, in that late June and July it went into. Now, we had a tough period in late June, but it was, what do you think, a week of it?
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
It wasn't.
We were pretty lucky. That was.
Yeah, we got lucky because the water rolled, and then it just we didn't have anything. It was like we struggled. It was tough. 4 or 5 fish catches. There's some guys getting skunked. And it was like, man.
We were just stuck with this cold water. It just didn't want to warm up.
Yep.
And then it's just like that. It warmed up, and then we had great fish.
Yeah. Yep. So we want to transition in June. We don't want to see the transition. I always get scared when I see transition, but once we get through it, then we figure it out. Then we want, you'll never want change. We get spoiled.
And I think that's something like a lot of the newer fishermen don't understand because they'll see the cold water, and I think that's a good thing.
Right.
Because salmon live in cold water.
Right.
And they're like, why is the fishing tough? Why do you want this water to warm up?
Explain that, because they might not know, right? Like, we know what you're talking about, but explain why that is.
Well, if you get into, and Rob's 100% right, you get into the spring, there's no warm water. Okay. but the bait fish love warm water.
We're talking about like late spring in that cusp of
Yeah.
summer period.
So
Now. Not like early spring, but like we're getting to that. We're in June. Like here's the setup. Right, last year we were in June. And it was still cold.
Yep.
In the first 2 weeks of June, the water was still.
And we had pretty good fishing, and then we caught the transition, and the fish, we couldn't find them. They scattered. Okay.
Now this is a result, right? Because the water's cold throughout the water column.
Right.
And that's where we're trying to.
Once that water warmed up a little bit and the water column got set up, that's when the bait fish showed up again. And what a lot of guys don't understand, it's bait. Again, I refer back to the bait. These fish will not stay unless there's bait. So if there's fish in an area, you may not mark the bait, but there's a reason it's there. Mm-hmm. And cohos are the most aggressive fish on the lake, as far as they'll eat all day. Now, kings eat, and when they eat, they're aggressive, but they don't feed as much as a coho. Mm-hmm. But when they feed, obviously heavier. That's why they get bigger. Mm-hmm. But they don't feed. A coho, once they're on bait, they'll be there all day long. And you catch them coughing up alewives. Yeah. So when that transition happened, like Rob was saying, all of a sudden the water started to warm up, and it got into that low 60s, and then all of a sudden the fish showed up again, and then all of a sudden they were full of bait again. And that's where the transition. We start fishing them different, lead cores with dodgers on them, small coppers, and putting our riggers down 25 to 30 to 40, and it seems like right in that area.
That 40 range was really sweet for a while.
Yes.
So we've kind of to wrap up this idea for especially for newer guys, understanding this whole concept of like why it really wasn't that great having so much cold water going into June is when that water column is cold throughout the water column, top to bottom, it's still in the 50s, for instance, right?
Yep.
And people are thinking, well, it's great for salmon because they like the cold.
Right.
Well, when it's cold everywhere, that means they can be everywhere in the water, and they're spread out everywhere. So when we do get a water setup where it gets warmer at the top, 60, 62, that's when we start getting those breaks where we find that 50, and now those fish, it's almost like they compress them down in the water column. So now, as he was talking about, there was a period there in late June where like 30 down, 40 down, you put lead cores down, it was like this. You'd pop them because now you're eliminating the water is what it is. You're eliminating dead water because they're not going to be necessarily in the warmer water. Yes, they will feed in it, right? But like it helps to narrow your field and get your lures in this prime area of water. So just for clarification on that, and so that's what we were talking about here. You mentioned about August and the coho and fishing them. Let's talk on that because I know you said you wanted to speak on what that experience was like. So expand on that?
So the cohos started showing up, and it was a little bit unusual because they showed up on the hill. And typically, it seems like when they show up in August or even late July sometimes, but it's typically August when they show up. They're out in 200 to 300 feet of water. But this year they showed up on the hill, and I think it was because there was bait. And we started fishing them, and I kind of went old school a little bit. A lot of times, I'm going back on memory, but it seemed like that 40 to 60 down was good. Mm-hmm. And what I do a lot of times is I don't run you'll see guys running 15, 20 rods. I'm pretty set on my 9 to 12 rods. And then I went to 12 then because of the cohos and the few steelhead around. But I'll typically run, my 2 dipsies, on the side. And the stubbies have gotten really hot, obviously. Yeah. I mean, they've been really good the last couple of years. And I like plastics that time of year too. Your big red dodgers, the hot spots or whatever. And then in the old school is the white hot spot. I cut my Howie. I love Howie flies. I cut them in half. A lot of times I'll run, a white Howie cut in half, green crinkle cut in half. It just seems like they want that.
So you chop it down to 2 inches instead of the 4-ish
that
they are.
The white Howies always seems to be pretty good. Green crinkle is phenomenal that time of year. And I'll run a lot of. I like the stubbies out on the. I didn't run them close to the boat only because I'm trolling a little faster. But I ran them on my shallow leads. I was
going to ask because if you're running fast, if you're running those stubbies fast, that can tumble them. So how do you manage that? Do you then start to slow down a little bit if you're running
just a touch.
Okay.
But I like my Tierra boat, I can't slow down. It seems like I just but I'll run them out a little bit. Okay. A lot of guys like them early in the spring, and I love the stubbies. I think they're unbelievable. But I go back to the smaller Dodgers a lot in the spring. I'm going to go back to that because people are wondering why I'm going fast. because I think they're a little better at the faster speed.
Okay.
You know, but getting back to the August fishing, so it seemed like it was 40 to 60 down, and I went back to some metal dodgers, smoke. You know, lure gents and smoke. I don't even, do they make them?
Trash, is it called smoke trash can?
Yeah.
Trash can.
So I love that with the green crinkle. You know, the aqua howie. And again, I'm howie. It doesn't matter. You know, there's a lot of good flies out there.
Yeah.
Went back to a lot of the 2-inch flies. You know, the regular 2-inch flies. But my best rod last year was the orange plastic green crinkle, cut in half and normal size, in August. And on my 2 outside dipsies. My one fire, I ran a wire deep, and I ran a fire dipsy on the outside in a 3.5 setting. It seemed between 100 and 150. The one was at like 100 to 120. We'd move down a little bit later in the morning. And the other one was at 150 on the outside. They were my best rods for the cohos, for the big cohos. And then my 2 boom riggers for some reason. The wire dipsies I kept down deeper out of the way just to try to catch kings.
Kings, yeah.
We'd catch a few cohos on it, but I kept them down, so we wouldn't have a problem with them. But my 2 boom riggers and then my dips. And then my 150 copper and my 200 coppers were really good. Orange plastics, any variety. The frog got good there for a while. But it seemed like that green crinkle. What do they call the dark green, the warrior or something?
Green Monster.
There's something like that. It was old school when I pulled some out of the box. Oh, this should work. They actually work pretty good. But it just, and then it seemed like a few spoons. It just seemed like they wanted the Dodgers better. A few Stinger spoons, and some of the Dreamweaver stuff, moonshines, where it seemed like they were good. The Asian orange, I think it was. It seemed like that one was a good one, the medium one, not the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed like that was decent on a 250 copper for me, because it catch a few steelhead, then it would catch a couple cohos, get hit 4, 5, 6 times. But that, that's pretty good, for a 6 hour, so. But in speed, as far as speed, I mean, like I say, it was always, and again, I gotten so used to fishing faster, and sometimes I think it hurts me, but I've gotten so used to it that I keep it up, and a lot of times the Dodgers are spinning and it doesn't look right, but when you get them down in the water, remember they're going to slow down a little bit, so I mean, but I love the orange plastic, white plastic, and the other, can't think of it, the white Dodger, I can't think of the name of it, a brain fart here. I'll think of it.
You mentioned before that because you fish faster, you don't fish those Dodgers as close to the boat or as close to the ball in your riggers.
Nope.
How does your speed affect the distance behind the ball and
the
action of your baits, basically, right?
Yeah, I will run them closer for the cohos, for the bigger cohos. I'd stretch them a little bit, but it's also if they're not getting hit, sometimes I'll stretch them out to try them. I think the Dodger spins more for me. I'm going to get more spinning than more of the back and forth like this, the wobble. But I don't think that hurts. The metal Dodgers, I lean more away from metal Dodgers closer to the boat because I think the spinning is not as good. You know what I mean? It's too much, and then you spin them off sometimes. But with the plastic, you can get away with it a little more. I love spin doctors for kings for that reason. I love using spin doctors because I think you get a better action on them. But for kings, for cohos, it's definitely hot spots or I'm drawing a.
Well, I think too, I like spin doctors because you can go faster than it.
Right.
Versus a standard board. So it kind of makes sense for your style of fishing that a spin doctor would probably be work a bit better for you. When you talk about tight to the ball, off to the ball, what for you is tight to the ball? What to you stretching it out? Just generally speaking.
Tight to the ball for me is like 5, 6 feet.
Okay.
So, stretching it to me, my normal distance is probably, I'm guessing 12 to 15 feet. We do it by eye, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if I'm stretching, it'll go back 30, 40 feet.
Okay.
I don't do that a lot. I don't know why. I know, I'll talk to Rich Tanner from Stellar, and I'll say, man, we'll talk about fishing on the phone or whatever. He goes, yeah, I'm stretching this one. It's been pretty good. Well, something's, the water's clear, the ball's spooking them or something, the boat, or whatever. But a lot of times I like to keep them at 12, 15 feet. It seems the best. And it seems like, in the springtime when I'm fishing cohos, if we're getting down like 20, 25 feet, I'll get them real tight to the ball, especially if the water's dirty. I'll bring them into that 3, 4 feet, right on the ball.
Wow.
It seems like a, red or whatever, stubby or whatever you're using,
Yeah.
So.
And they're not scared of the balls. That sound right?
Yeah.
The fish are not scared of the downrigger balls. And I've seen it on live scope. They'll come right in, and I've seen it numerous times. They'll come in, on like I'm pulling a torpedo, and they'll come on the torpedo first. They'll look at it, and then they'll fall back to the dodger or whatever's being pulled behind it. So they definitely aren't scared. Maybe curious or
Curious, I think, and then that's where we getting back to what we were talking to earlier about having your stuff right. Because if you have 10, 15, 20 fish come up and look at it and none of them bite it, well, that's no good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I always tell my customers, the fish have a brain the size of a pea, and you got to try to trick them. And some days that's pretty tough, it is, and you get frustrated, you get frustrated when you're marking a lot of fish, or, your buddy's got 20 fish and you got 5, and I get frustrated to this day. I'm like, oh man, if he's got 20, I should have 20. You think that way, but that's good and bad. You start getting more aggressive, or you start, changing. What am I doing wrong? I take advice to this day from anybody. My cousin fishes, once a weekend, and he calls me all the time. We talk, and there'll be times where he's got more fish. What's going on? He'll say, well, I just did this, And sometimes that attitude of just going out, a lot of times I get, Rob will tell you this, I'm kind of a loner. And I don't mean that bad, but I try to get away from boats a lot of times. Not if they're catching fish and there's no fish anywhere else, but if we're out in the deep water, say 200 plus, a lot of times if we're fishing trout down deep or steelhead or cohos, whatever, I'll try to venture away from people. And because there's less pressure.
Yeah, sure.
Not all the time, I mean, last year in the Milwaukee tournament, we went out to 250, 300 feet of water, which is not that far out of Milwaukee, because I got a tip. And it was as good as you wanted it. And there was 200 boats in that area. So it wasn't affecting them,
Right, yeah.
But a lot of times I try to be not alone, but just get, and a lot of that too is you don't have to worry about turning or worry about getting cut off or cutting somebody off or whatever. You know what I mean?
The truth is, when you're out that far, you're running a lot, you got a lot of lines out and a lot of long lines out, so you want that space. Because there's a reason why you're out that far. The fish are, so I think in most cases that it makes sense. Because otherwise you're going to be running in and having issues.
And a rarity, for me and Arnie and some of the guys is, I really do want everybody to catch fish. I mean, in a tournament, I don't, obviously. I want to win. But
I love the honesty.
But
no fish for you. I want them all.
But, but I mean, I love when I love to see the boat ramps full. Okay. I think Lake Michigan is not utilized enough. And I truly love seeing the boat ramps full. And Sturgeon Bay, even though it was frustrating because there were so many boats, I thought it was cool. I'm like, man, this is awesome to see these little boats going out, and these guys, even though gas was $5 a gallon, they're hitting it,
Yeah.
And I like that,
Yeah, no, it's a good sign. I mean, we want many of us thrive off of the fishery for livelihoods and businesses and stuff. So it is exciting to see the continued interest. We see so many new guys coming in, leaving, not say leaving, but they want to venture from inland fishing for walleye and bass and say, you know what, I want to give Lake Michigan the salmon a shot. So it's great. And that's a lot of the reason why we've here doubled down on the podcast, because we're like, man, people are really looking for more information on it. And, we're in a unique position here with the shop to have a pulse on what's going on from captains like yourself and tournament anglers, and we do our best to share information in a way that it's easy to consume and people can learn from and take it and build on it and start to build their confidence out in the water and do all that. I want to pivot a little bit though and kind of get this, as we're talking about Kenosha fishing, going back to it, I want to cover 3 seasons: spring, summer, and the fall period. And this is for an angler that's going to start to fish out of Kenosha. In the spring, where should guys look to kind of get started when they're going to do their spring fishing? They're leaving port, you pass the break wall, now you're looking at all this open water. What should they be looking for? What areas would they might want to cover?
Well, if you asked me that 20 years ago, I would say be inside of 20 feet of water.
Okay.
Nowadays, it's tough. I typically don't get rolling until the middle of May. I'm just not an early guy. I like to, start fish are a little bigger, more consistent. It can be anywhere from 40 to 200 feet of water. And if I was going out, and obviously we're fishing 7 days a week when we get rolling, so it's a little different. But it seems like the last few years it's been outside of 100 feet. Not all the time. there was a stretch last spring in Kenosha that we were getting them inside the hill from 50 to 60 for, a couple of weeks stretch there. It seemed 10 days, and it was good fishing. We say lock and load, it was nothing back in the day, or even, when it's good now, you catch 30 fish in a couple hours for a charter. When they're biting, they're hitting anything, everything's right. It seemed like the open water last year, end of May, early June, we were outside 100. And then it was like 120, 140. And, it was just mainly surface stuff. Still the surface stuff, small lead, stuff like that. And a lot of it is, for an amateur guy, or I say amateur, a weekend guy, or a guy that only goes out once or twice a week, it's information. Because there's really no, to me in the spring, there's really no go-to spot until you find them. That might be 40 feet. That might be 140 feet. And honestly, if I was a guy coming out on Saturday, I'd go where the charter boats are going, because they're been out every day. And a lot of times we get a lot of information from the guys in North Point that time of year. Generally, a lot of times we're fishing down towards the line. I do have an Illinois guide license. I don't go into Illinois much, because it's hard to get both licenses, But a lot of times we talk to these guys down here because, Caleb found, fish in 120, or, he made it out to 200 and it was really good. It's hard in the spring now. Like I say, 20 years ago, typically inside 20, 30 feet of water to the beach. It was good. I haven't seen it like that in a long time. Long time. And a lot of it's water clarity, and the bait fish changed. In the day, the bait fish would come in and spawn in the spring, and you could literally go through schools of bait on the shore, and when you hit a school of bait, it was lock and load. It was, they're feeding, you're going through there with your baits, and it's just game on.
And you had the smelt earlier. The smelt kind of started it off, and the fish would be in there feeding on the smelt, and then the alewives would show up after that. So there was always bait in shallow. Now we don't have the smelt.
Nope. And the bait fish, to me, in the spring, it seemed like until they, they'll come in and spawn, they do their thing, but it seems like the smaller ones are out deeper, and they're down deeper because of the warm water. And that's what we found. And then we had them shrimp for a while.
Yeah.
And that shrimp really, that was phenomenal, and that was odd fishing because, I remember the first time I heard about it, and it was one of these guys from Algoma, I think, or somebody said, I was talking to him, and he says, we're fishing, 70, 80 down. Well, you don't do that in the spring.
Yeah, they were running 300 coppers, a couple of Dodgers.
And they were killing them. And I'm like, so I remember going out that afternoon, I put a Dodger down 80 feet, and it wasn't down there 5 minutes, it took off with a 3-pound coho. And I'm like, well, this is changing, and it was just, it's different, and that's why it's hard to say, where are you going to go in the spring, Now, June to me, you get into that midsummer with the cohos, and when you get into transition, like
so
we
now
talked.
we're going to talk about summer now, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about summer now. You just passed the break wall out of the harbor. Where are they going? What are they looking for?
So in the summer, again, to me, let's start with like mid-June, when you're getting into that summer period where the transition. So we're going out, last year it seemed like 60 and out. Okay. And I say 50 to 60 just inside the hill, and on top of the hill, north of the harbor was pretty good for us. And then going out over the hill, like that 70 to 80, and fishing them down a little bit. Now your cohos, you're getting a few kings. You can get a few lake trout, sporadic steelhead. It seems like our steelhead fishing when you're on them. And then get out from there. If you're not getting them inside there, then jump over the hill and just keep moving to the east. And don't go fast to the east. Don't go straight east. I like to go northeast or southeast to make sure I'm not missing anything. Mm-hmm. And then typically you'll find them somewhere right there, 120, 140, 130,
We talked about these bands.
Yep.
If for some reason they might just sit in that 110 feet of water, you'll go inside of 110, nothing. You go out inside of it, nothing. It's like 110, and you got to ride that line.
And the one advantage to going on to Kenosha, and this is later June, we get up towards Racine. I can't tell you how many years we get up towards, I say that 3950, 4350, 4450. People don't know what I'm talking about, east and west. That's the honey hole. And you get north of there's a bunch of little reefs, and you get up towards a reef marker. And then you get on the outside of the reef marker. That's a very good area for late season coho, as we call it. And Jim Mueller, a good friend of mine, stormtrooper up there, I call Jim a lot of times and network with him and some of the guys up there. Yeah, we're getting them good here. And then it seems like they'll hold in that area, water temperature bait, and then you usually get a week to 10 days, 2 weeks of that, and then we have to start jumping outside, and then we transition more lake trout and stuff like that. So,
gotcha. Now, fall period. Now in fall, there's quite a few different options for a guy coming out of Kenosha because you're going to have your kings, whether they're staging or they're setting up, but then you still have fresh fish. I would say, let's just call them fresh fish, which are not the 4-year-olds, the juveniles and 3-year-olds, stuff like that. You kind of have more to play with there. Right. So, kind of run down that time of the year and options and how you fish both sides. I'm sure you focus more on the outside stuff, right?
More I do because it's so limited on the inside stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's improving though. We're doing net pens in Kenosha to help the kings and stuff like that. So if I'm going, let's say September 1st. So last year we were fortunate; we still had the Cohos, and we had some kings. So last year my routine was go out in the morning, set up on the deep side of the hill because they seemed to be in that 90 to 110 foot of water for us, and then we didn't have to move much. But on a normal year, we'd fish the hill, or I still love the hill because I think the kings still stage there. I feel if the 4-year-olds are coming in the into the harbor to spawn and do their thing, I think it brings the 3-year-olds and the 2-year-olds. They might not come into the harbor, but I think it brings them. The ones that were stocked here and the ones that are, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'll start on the hill and then typically, depending on what's happening, just keep sliding out. And then in past years, sometimes we had to rely on lake trout a little bit. As far as fishing the beach and that and fishing the river mouth, I don't do a lot of that anymore because it's just not consistent enough.
Yeah.
But I know Racine was, had a stretch last year where it was pretty good in front of the harbor mouth.
It was, yeah.
But you had to be there, and it was an advantage for the Racine guys because they could set up there, and if it wasn't good, they pull lines, run out. For me to run up there,
right?
So that's typically what I do, and I still fish kings. Last year I did make a couple times passes in front of the creek, and we caught a few, and then when I knew that it wasn't going to happen, we'd go out deeper.
Yeah.
But in the old days, we'd set up at the harbor mouth, go down to the creek, and we made our living.
Yeah. I definitely noticed when I was out there a couple times, I see some of the charter boats just pull once or twice across, pike and either shoot out or maybe get a line to run.
And it's hard not to go to the deep water when we have charter customers, because,
right.
It's pretty consistent. It's usually, we had a pretty good September. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was the best September we ever had, but, with the Cohos being there, which was nice. And then even when the Coho fishing would slow up a little bit, you could slide out and catch a few lake trout and get your numbers, Yeah. So it was pretty good. And it changes all the time. So it's hard to say year to year. Last year we had the Cohos on the hill. The year before, with the little stretch we had of Cohos in the late summer, we had to be out deeper.
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago in a tournament, there was a tournament in August, the one down here, the Supa or whatever. Guys were fishing, we were trying to get our fish, big fish, 400 feet of water for Cohos.
Jeez.
So I know they're out there all the time because they're feeding on bait. It's just they feed on little baby perch a lot too, and it's just sometimes they're farther. We can't reach them.
Yeah.
It's hard to go out there.
Yeah. I still always wonder why those little perch are just out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. It's so mind-boggling. What makes them?
Yeah, you'll clean the fish and and you'll see what are them? They're baby perch. So
crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Let me ask you this as we kind of wrap everything up here. You're setting up on any given morning. Run us down what's on your riggers and your dipsies.
If I'll just use a tournament for example because that's easiest. But like my tournament spread usually is I'll run 9 rods, and I typically start my charters like that. So I'll run 3 downriggers. I usually run two Dodgers on my booms. Usually like a white plastic hotspot.
You're talking about 8-inch Dodgers, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And then I'll run. I like the frog. White Howie a lot of times. Depending on the water clarity. Little boy blue stuff like that. And then on my center rigger, I always got a spoon, some kind of spoon, moonshine or something. My 2 dipsies, my wire dipsies are usually Dodger, Spin Doctor or something. I'm doing a summer spread. And then in my coppers are generally my shallow coppers. I like spoons. I say 150s, 200s, 250s. I like spoon. But if I'm running a 300, 350, I don't run anything larger than a 300 typically because I don't like to bring them in. So
you don't want a new 600? We got a new reel we just got in.
I know. I saw it.
Did you see the post? It looks amazing.
It does. But then if I run a 350 is usually the deepest for me. Dodgers typically. Okay. Because I think some kind of Spin Doctor, typically hot spot, something. You got the salmon candy Dodgers. You got so much stuff out there. It's like crazy. It's just finding what. That's usually typically my setup. Usually I'll run 3 coppers in the summer. 4 dipsies and 3 downriggers is usually what I run. And then when I get my shallow dipsies out, it's usually, sometimes I run spoons in August for steelhead, because we had a good steelhead run last year, pretty good steelhead run in August. So I'll run spoons. But then last year when the coho showed up, I started putting the stubbies on there and stuff like that. It's usually typically my setup.
Which stubby colors are you using? So like early spring, we all know all you really need, right, is orange and fire dot.
Yeah,
right.
I would agree.
But summertime, you can expand on some of these colors.
I like the smoke one.
It's okay.
I like the smoke one a lot.
Okay.
I like the smoke one a lot in mid to late June. And another charter boat captain is the one that told Frank from 24/7. It says, called me up and I said, Frank, man, I see your neck going, And we were just struggling a little bit. He said, man, that smoke with the green crinkle cut in half, the stubby, put it out and,
Now, have you noticed, going back to basically at the beginning of the conversation, you had mentioned the watercolor. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed any kind of correlation between that trash can and certain kinds of watercolor, or just it works with any of the watercolors?
Smoke, trash can, I think is probably your overall, probably best, like you get that clear water, it seems to work okay. You get that medium water, it seems to work okay. And then you can catch fish when it's dirty. But dirty water, to me, yellow. Yellow, I don't care. It just seems like, a couple years ago, the water was dirty and that 30 foot of water, and Dion was with me, and I said, yellow dodger kept going off. I was rifling through my stuff, finding yellow dodgers, and we just kept throwing yellow, and it was just, that's all they wanted. I like white, in dirtier water, white Howie, white, stuff like a Mirage with yellow beads in it. I think it's huge. Crinkle Mirage, stuff like that. But smoke and green was our green crinkle. The regular, 8-inch or whatever, double O or whatever it is, single O, was our number one setup for a long time. For kings too. Back before plastics, that was our number one setup. Smoke and.
I think a lot of people might, like for instance, when people are like, "Hey, where are your stubbies at?" and we'll show them on the list, and you'll see like there's quite a few smoke up there, and I think a lot of people don't see it as anything flashy. It looks boring.
Yeah, but it's
highly effective.
Yes. And orange obviously is good early.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, the cohos last year in August, the orange kept right up with everything else. It was right there with everything else.
How surprised were you when you saw those donkeys start showing up in August, September? Wasn't it something crazy?
Yeah, it was crazy because and where they were.
So they were close.
On the hill.
I caught my PB in 80, 90 feet of water.
Yeah, it was crazy. And to me, a coho that size is harder to catch than a big king. I think. Because when they hit, they like on a downrigger or something or a dipsy, they're hitting so violent. Where a king will hit, and a king's pretty predictable. A big king will hit the downrigger, it comes off, and then he's trying to shake that out of his mouth. And they typically won't run right away. Now, I'm not talking 10, 15-second delay, but if you watch a big king hit a downrigger, he'll bust it off, and it's a big fish, you get to the rod, and a lot of times he's not pulling yet, and then he goes, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And even on a copper, a king will hit it, and he'll rip, and he's more predictable. Where them big cohos, and especially on dipsies, they're a nightmare. When they get that 10, 12, 15 pounds, they're hard to catch. And even guys that know what they're doing. I'm telling you, charter customers only go out once a year, twice a year. They don't really know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But you even get guys like us. It's frustrating. But I love the way a big coho hits. I do. The way they crunch it and they just it's game on.
Yeah. No, you see how feisty they are when they're small in the spring and they're just thrashing all over the place. Now they're like 12, 10, 10 plus, and they're doing the same thing.
Yep.
I was fortunate. I caught mine. It hit a lead core, and it was going crazy, and then it kind of stopped. I'm like, well, oh no! I'm like, what happened? So it ended up rolling itself from the leader line.
Yeah.
So I landed it.
The lead core is probably the best rod to catch them on as far as landing goes. Because while you're dipsy, they get off of those really easily.
Yep.
And a lot of times you're fishing those riggers real close to the ball, and it gets into everything else. Yep. And so if you can get them on a lead core, you're in good shape.
And that lead core gives you a little stretch.
Yep.
Whereas a 150 copper, there's no stretch.
Yeah, no.
Mm-hmm. It's right there. But that lead core will give them a little bit, and they work real well. Lead core is 5 colors, 7 colors.
Yes.
For that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like I say, I like coppers out deeper because I think they're more true. Less line. I just think I don't know. I think, and this is my theory, I think when you get too far out with, you hear guys running 20 color leads. Well, I think actually you're hurting yourself because I think it goes out so far and then it just comes back up.
Mm-hmm. It bows out. I mean, I kind of, I guess.
I believe that. I know, I mean,
yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, a lot covered here with, fishing out of Racine. Did you have anything else to add, Rob, or any other questions before we tie this thing up?
No, I think we covered it all pretty well.
Yeah. I want to make sure that everybody knows where they can contact you to get out and do some fishing with you this season. So you want to let them know where you're at and how to reach
it's
you?
rainmakersportfishing.com is my website. And then, I love text. My direct number for text. And you can text me for fishing information. If you're coming out of Kenosha, just say, hey, this is John, and I've never been out of Kenosha. I'll text you, But my direct number is 262-620-2976. And I'd be glad to talk to you.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So there it is, guys. This episode here talking about fishing out of Kenosha. Hopefully you found some things of interest, and definitely want to have you back to talk about some stuff.
Absolutely.
Maybe do it more tournament driven, because obviously you're on both sides of that fence.
Yep.
As a charter, and then obviously it's fishing a little bit different. Although it sounds like you approach it the same, whether it's your charter or it's a tournament. But I think having you come back in and kind of talking about the tournament side of it would be really, really cool.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I always tell people, tournaments are always won on plan B or C. Plan A never pans out day of the tournament. You might go there, and I try to teach people that in my seminars. When I do my few seminars, I tell them, have a plan B, have a plan C. We've won more tournaments and done well in tournaments because of the plan C. And that's scrambling, but I feel that if you're only going out once a week, why wouldn't you approach it like that? You have one opportunity to go catch fish, and that's kind of the way I look at it, so.
You got to be able to adjust on the fly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Have to. So thank you guys for watching this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Make sure to throw it a thumbs up, share with a friend who might find this of use and interesting. And we will be back with another video, another episode here in the near future. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys later.